All right, let's just jump right into this explainer because today we are completely reframing how you see one of the world's most famous destinations. I mean, for most people, Okinawa, it's just a beach, right? White sand, clear blue water, beautiful coral reefs. It's the ultimate winter escape for Japanese honeymooners, or maybe it's just synonymous with American military bases. But we are going way past that surface level illusion today. We're going to explore this incredibly complex, profound history of resilience, tragedy, and survival that actually built this island. So let's start with this wild historical quirk. The people living on these islands today, a lot of them actually do not call themselves Japanese. They call themselves Okinawan. They speak their own native language, Uchinaguchi, and they don't even call their home Okinawa, they call it Ryukyu. And get this, when they talk about 1879, the year they officially became a Japanese prefecture, they literally never call it an annexation or a unification, they call it a disposition, like the disposing of a thing. To figure out why, we gotta look at what was actually there first. And it really comes down to this massive clash between the modern illusion of Okinawa and its actual reality. Look, before the tourist resorts, for 450 years, this place was an independent kingdom. It was incredibly wealthy too. It had a king ruling from this magnificent, bright red palace called Shuri Castle. It had its own court, its own unique religion led by female priestesses, and entirely separate foreign treaties with China, Korea, and Southeast Asia. Because it sat right smack in the middle of these major maritime trade routes, it was a rich crossroads that thrived without ever needing to conquer anyone else. So how exactly does a centuries-old kingdom just vanish? Well, it unified back in 1429 and thrived until about 1609, when the Satsuma clan from southern Japan invaded. That forced the kingdom into this really weird dual vassalage, answering to both Japan and China. But the absolute breaking point, that hit in the late 19th century. In 1872, Japan unilaterally declares the kingdom a Japanese domain. Fast forward to March 27th, 1879, and a Japanese officer just marches right into Shuri Castle with hundreds of armed men. The 36-year-old king, Shotai, is given literally 2 days' notice to pack up and leave his palace forever. He gets shipped off to Tokyo, lives out his days as a minor aristocrat, and just like that, the entire kingdom is erased in an afternoon. Now, the absolutely crucial thing to understand here is that for the Okinawan people, survival and accommodation became their philosophical anchor. Go back to that initial invasion in 1609. When the invading forces finally broke through the last line of defense, the ruling king gave his army one single profound order before surrendering: Nuchi du Takara. It translates to life is a treasure. He literally told his soldiers to lay down their weapons to avoid a total slaughter. That specific philosophy, choosing survival over some hopeless, bloody conquest, became permanently woven into the island's DNA. And that brings us to the core theme of this whole explainer. Okinawa is a place where things just hold on, even when staying makes absolutely zero sense. You see it ecologically and culturally. The island absolutely refuses to vanish. You've got the habu viper, a snake that somehow thrives in the ruins of ancient limestone tombs. You have the Okinawa rail, which is a flightless bird, by the way, and it still manages to outlast invasive mongooses. Then there's the native language, Uchinaguchi, painstakingly saved by a scholar named Iha Fuyu, right when the schools were actively trying to stamp it out. And you can't forget the Tuboya potters. Their 400-year-old kilns were some of the very few structures left partially standing when the capital was completely leveled in the 1940s. The culture literally just holds on. Okay, you want to see this survival in action? Let's talk karate. A lot of people don't realize that karate, which literally translates to empty hand, was actually born in Okinawa, not mainland Japan. See, the ruling class banned everyday citizens from owning bladed weapons, so what did the commoners do? They adapted. They took Chinese martial arts, mixed them with their own local fighting styles, and practiced in total secret. We're talking late-night training in courtyards lit by nothing but oil lamps, just to learn how to defend themselves bare-handed. Karate was never about conquest. It was this incredible workaround by a restricted people defending themselves with the absolute only thing they had left. And you know, we see this exact same resilience in their famous longevity. I'm sure you've heard about the Okinawan Blue Zone, right? Places like Ogimi Village, where they have this wild number of centenarians. But people totally miss the point here. This wasn't born out of some modern wellness trend. That famous plant-based diet of sweet potatoes and tofu, that was just the diet of historically poor people who literally couldn't afford expensive rice or meat. Add that to deep, lifelong social support groups, they call them moai, where friends pool their resources for decades, and ikigai, which is this deeply ingrained reason to get out of bed every morning. Their longevity was forged by hardship and true community, not a trendy lifestyle choice. Moving into our next section, the 82-day crucible, spring 1945. So, as American forces were pushing north across the Pacific, the Japanese Imperial Army made this incredibly grim strategic call. They issued a chilling directive. Okinawa would not be defended to win. It would be defended to delay. The entire goal was purely to absorb damage and buy time for the Japanese home islands. The 32nd Army basically abandoned the northern half of Okinawa, heavily fortified the south, and tragically, they issued 0 serious evacuation orders for the 400,000 civilians living right in the middle of the crossfire. Just take a second to really absorb this number, 1 in 4. During those 82 days of absolutely unimaginable combat, a quarter of the Okinawan civilian population perished. That is roughly 100,000 people. Some died in the bombardments, others literally starved hiding in limestone caves. And maybe the most devastating part, so many took their own lives because the military propaganda had entirely convinced them that being captured by the Americans was a fate worse than death. But even in that intense darkness, there were these incredible flashes of humanity. Take Teruto Tsuboda. He was a Japanese-American military intelligence translator embedded with the U.S. frontline units. But because he was raised by Okinawan immigrants in Hawaii, he actually spoke fluent Uchinaguchi. He made it his personal mission to stand right outside those sealed-up limestone caves and shout into the dark in their native tongue. Language literally saved life here. He was able to cut straight through that terrifying propaganda, earn their trust, and coaxed terrified families out into the daylight. Today, if you go to the exact hill in Mabuni where the battle finally ended, you'll find the cornerstone of peace. It's these long, sweeping granite walls engraved with over 240,000 names. But what makes this memorial so profoundly moving is that the Okinawan people absolutely refused to separate the dead by nationality. They chose to recognize every single casualty as a human being first. So American soldiers, Japanese soldiers, Korean conscripts, and Okinawan civilians, they are all carved into the exact same stone. And honestly, they're still adding new names to it today. All right, let's fast forward to the post-war era, because this perfectly sets up the geopolitical tension we see today. So in 1951, the rest of Japan signs a peace treaty and gets their sovereignty back. But Okinawa, completely left out. For nearly 3 decades, the island existed in this stateless geopolitical limbo under a 27-year American administration. Locals were driving on the right side of the road, they were buying groceries with US dollars, and they were subject to American military law. It wasn't until 1972 that administrative control finally reverted to Japan. But, to the shock of a lot of locals, those massive military bases didn't go anywhere. And that brings us to this distribution, which really highlights the modern burden Okinawans navigate every single day. Look at this. Okinawa makes up less than 1% of Japan's total landmass. Less than 1%. Yet it houses 70% of all American military installations in the entire country. It's wild when you think about it. The exact same strategic geography that made the Ryukyu Kingdom rich from trade centuries ago is the exact same geography that makes it absolutely essential for modern military powers today. And as you can imagine, this creates a ton of ongoing friction between local Okinawan voters, their governor Denny Tamaki, and the central Japanese government in Tokyo. For example, you have the Marine Corps Air Station Futema. This beast is basically dropped right into a dense grid of 100,000 civilians, literally shaking their windows every single day. Tokyo's plan is to relocate it to Henoko Bay, but local voters have repeatedly rejected that expansion. A big reason why is that the offshore construction has pushed the deeply revered local dugong, which is this marine mammal that used to be sacred to the islanders, to functional extinction in those waters. Now, to be clear, the residents aren't ignoring global realities. They know exactly where they are in a map. They know they're incredibly close to Taiwan and the South China Sea. Many locals even work on these bases or have family ties there. But they're constantly asking Tokyo about the math here. They're basically saying, we understand the need for security, but you haven't asked anyone else in Japan to bear this exact same burden, and we'd really like to know why. Why does this one tiny prefecture have to shoulder so much of the national security weight? Which brings us to our final section, the unbroken thread. And honestly, nothing captures this unbroken thread quite like Shiri Castle. This palace has been completely destroyed 5 times in its history, most recently by a really tragic fire back in 2019. But the island immediately rallied to rebuild it. It's set to reopen in autumn 2026, funded by a staggering $40 million in global crowdfunding. And there's this one story that just perfectly captures the incredibly complex modern reality of Okinawa. Mari Gregory, a U.S. military spouse, actually independently raised $11,000 to help rebuild the castle. So think about that. A castle destroyed by American forces in 1945 is now being rebuilt, in part, thanks to an American military spouse. So what does all this mean? Against all odds, through invasions, total annexation, devastating war, and decades of foreign administration, these people have somehow never stopped being Okinawan. They still remember a kingdom that ended in 1879, they still dance the traditional dances, and they still carve names into the stone at Labuni. But with the older generations passing on and new concrete constantly pouring into Henoko Bay, it leaves us with this heavy question. When the last fluent speakers are gone and the new bases are built, will they still be Okinawan in 50 years? We don't have the answer yet, but if their 450-year track record of pure resilience tells us anything, this is an island that absolutely refuses to let its story end. Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer today. Keep questioning, and I'll catch you next time.